and that it's done properly. And that's one of the films that that people have come up. Actually, two people. There was a gentleman from Russia who just wants to produce it, and he says, "Can you write a script?" I told him, "Listen, I love Saint Seraphim Rose, but I'm writing Saint Moses. I can't do. I'm not like a writer for hire. It's everybody's different, And then there was a friend of mine who called me, not a friend, somebody I knew, says, "Yelena, I heard that you're doing Saint Seraphim Rose. I got a blessing from the Platina Fathers, and I'm trying to do it. But if you're doing it," I said, "I'm not doing it." I told him, somebody just approached me, so please go ahead, write a script. We were talking, and I said I might even be able to help you to get it off the ground. Yeah. So ironically, that's been on my radar as well. I mean, there are great stories. There's Saint John of Shanghai. There's, there are some amazing saints out there that I think their stories could be well told, and they can speak to the audience very well.
Yelena, if I heard you correctly, it sounds like Saint Simeon Productions, your vision for it is really it's turning into a whole production company, not just to fund your film, but
no,
that's
exactly,
very exciting. I'm going to throw it out there really quick. Maybe you have a podcast wing of Saint Simeon Productions. Because one thing, as you know, this community, many people in this room have been part of our little podcast of telling the lives of the saints. And our dream and hope is very similar to yours in terms of wanting to put the truth out there through those stories, and maybe people's lives will be edified, changed, affected by those stories. So perhaps down the road, our paths can cross yet again.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm 100% open to any of the good work. I'm not. I'm honestly not doing this for my own glory. I just simply have passion to tell these stories, and I would support anybody else who can. I would love to. My dream is just to, if I can just finish St. Moses the Black, and then I can just sit in the background and just help others suffer through the through the necessary steps that they're if you're gonna do anything that's worthwhile, trust me, you're gonna have to kind of sweat a little bit, if it's gonna be good.
Yelena, we're blessed to have you. May remember Father Nathan from St. Anthony's.
Oh yes, hello, Father.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
We're at his house right now, just so you know.
That's fantastic.
How did you decide to do Saint Nektarios? What was that?
Well, again, I mean, Saint Anthony has a lot. This is interesting. Somebody actually also sent me a script on Saint Athanasius the Great, where Saint Anthony comes in. Well, I must say I haven't read it yet. This is how, but I will, because it's something I have to do. But it's not because it's just simply I've been traveling now. I've been for 3 weeks in the US from one city to another, and it's kind of, you can imagine it's not easy to go through that travel and talk to people every day. And but Saint Anthony, while I want to say something in connection to making Saint Nektarios. When I was 25 years old, I had my first confession and communion. I was baptized at 21 in St. Sava Church in St. Gabriel in Los Angeles. So I even though I was born in Serbia, and you would say I'm naturally Orthodox, but I didn't know much forget about Orthodoxy. I didn't know much about Christianity, period. That my parents were not church-going people, nor were people that my cousins or, Serbia was similar to Russia at the time, was very communist oriented, and going to church was a taboo. And I think my mom was a teacher. And even though my parents were very good people, and I know they believed in God, but they were not practicing Christians. So for me, it sort of happened when I came to the US. And to go back to when I was 25 and I had my first confession and communion, it was a gift from God. Actually, I've experienced the presence of grace, physical grace, for quite a few hours. And to a point where a best friend of mine at the time, this Jewish lady, Mary, that said, "Well, Yelena, you finally got drunk, And I said, no, I didn't get drunk. I actually, something else happened. But that was her interpretation of my state, which was incredible joy that was mixed with tears and laughter. So anyhow, and it lasted for quite a few hours. So ever since then, I really kind of dwell into the liturgical life. And as the beginner in faith, you know, I would read a lot of stories on different saints. And for some reason, when I picked up Philokalia, I heard there was this great book, Philokalia. You have to read that. Those are great saints. And I read about Saint Anthony the Great, and for some reason, Saint Anthony the Great became my hero. I don't know why. I read his story. He looked to me, maybe I'm Serbian. I have this in my bloodline. Some of my ancestors, they're really heroes. They were good fighters, and I like fighters in general. So I looked at him, what kind of fighter he was, and I was sort of drawn to him. So I heard about this monastery in the desert that's dedicated to him, and that's the reason that I went to Saint Anthony's in Arizona, is because of Saint Anthony the Great, not because of Elder Ephraim or the monks. I knew there was some elder there, but that wasn't the reason. It was Saint Anthony. And so when I got there, I basically got there in the year 2000, and I used to go every few months for 15 years. Elder Ephraim was, I would see him quite often, talk to him, Yelena Popovic. They played a huge role in my spiritual growth, I would say. So the journey that never ends, basically. I'm far from any, obviously, perfection or anything like that, but I'm trying, you know, to be on the right path. So so interestingly enough, my father passed away in year 2011. My father was somebody who was, even though he didn't go to church, but he was truly a holy man. He was prosecuted because he was righteous. He never became a member of the Communist Party. He was a civil engineer. They brought 6 false witnesses to get rid of him from the job position. He couldn't get a job for many years, then worked in a small factory to the rest of his life. And everybody else around him was telling him, well, you're too honest. You could have had better life, but because you're too honest, you're just, but he was happy. He didn't care. So I was, you know, when I read the book about Saint Nektarios, that kind of rang the bell, because my father, I was in Serbia. He passed away in 2011. I couldn't go to the funeral because I was an immigrant. I still didn't have my papers resolved. So I was able to go there in 2012 when I got my green card sorted out. And that's when, during that memorial service, I visited a monastery. I went for a liturgy. That's where I saw a book about Saint Nektarios. So I thought, great, there's another saint. I heard about him. I'm going to read about him on the plane on the way back to Los Angeles. Well, as I was reading this book, it was as if every word of it was written in my soul for so many reasons. And I felt it was something that I had to work on and make a movie about it. And in 2015, after visiting Egin a couple of times and just asking Saint Nektarios to bless me if it's God's will to make film about him, I went to Arizona to ask Yelena Popovic and Yelena Ephraim for a blessing. And ironically, they tell me then, well, you have our blessing, but do you know that the church here is dedicated to Saint Nektarios? And I was like, I mean, I was going there for 15 years. I'm like, no, I thought it was Saint Anthony the Great. And they were like, no, yeah, it is, but also the Saint Nektarios is, you know, the icon on the right is Saint Nektarios. So that was the first time I found out that actually the church is also dedicated to Saint Nektarios. So in some ways, I guess he had an eye on me. I don't know how. Maybe you've seen this creature that was barely hanging on, like always living on faith, you know, cried way more than it laughed, you know, maybe cried while others laughed, you know, so I clearly cannot do a film like that unless I've experienced some of the pain. You know, I don't want to talk about it, but you can see it in a movie. So yeah, I decided to put all that in the film, whatever I've been through, and share it through his story. So therefore, bring him hopefully in a human and honest way to people's hearts. So that's how it happened. So Saint Anthony, in some ways, is somewhere in the background. For whatever reason, he's there.
So I have a quick follow-up question. What's how did Saint Moses come into the picture?
Well,
After-
again, I like with other saints, I read that ending of his life. And again, now the fighting spirit, this is my old thing. And I was like, wow, look at this guy, he's not afraid of death. He's just standing there, he's getting slaughtered. To me, that's like, that's the Serbian blood. I had one of my great ancestors was a man called Marko Miljanov. You can even find him in Wikipedia. He liberated the village of in Montenegro, Serbian village from Turks. He led a battle with 3,000 people against 25,000 army that was better fed, better soldiers, better equipped, and they beat them all. And they were not afraid to die. So I have that in my bloodstream. I like that. That's why I think the story of a gangster. I don't think these people are bad people. I think a lot of people, especially people, they're not afraid of death. There is something holy about them, and they get bad on the bad side of the tracks, because life brings them there, and they can be great people if somebody can direct them on the right path. So that's what attracts me to a story like that.
Thanks.
Yelena, we don't want to keep you forever, I promise. Are you okay with a couple more questions?
I'm okay. You can ask me any questions. I'm
Amen.
enjoying
We
it.
really appreciate it. This is Forrest. Forrest, come on.
Hello, I'm a parishioner from St. Anthony's. First, I wanted to thank you for creating this film. I remember when I first watched it, in the first couple minutes actually of the film, a lot of the films I'd seen before were they were like under budget films, but this one, the cinematic and all of it was there, and it moved into appreciating it for that, and then for, as was mentioned before, all these subtle ways in which we can experience the implicit grace as from an audience perspective of Nektarios. One of the things that stuck out to me were scenes like the interaction he had with the president, where he said he was innocent, and then he says, "I'm sure you are," and he leaves.
Yeah.
Then he's not, well, he's just gracefully, slowly shuts the door instead of, and in the audience, I was upset. I was like, slam that door. And he sort of just, shuts the door patiently. And throughout the film also, I had a question about, there were a few scenes where there were interactions. Were these taken from context that he had, like doing research, like in specific, the ending scene where he's talking about the man who was like a paraplegic, he was talking about how his circumstances and how they were having an interaction basically where he's forced to do that, and Saint Nektarios had said most people should ask that question. It was like sort of this existential question.
That scene was written by me. That scene doesn't exist anywhere. This is
I really appreciate that. It was a good statement.
yeah. The truth was that there was a man there. We don't know what they talked about, if they talked. And the truth is that man was there. He was paralyzed. There were actually two of them in the room, but for the purpose of the film, there was no need to, there were two patients. The room is still there. It's still in Athens. You can actually go and visit. And
Wow.
the bed where Saint Nektarios passed away is still there. So there were two other beds. So there was one patient next to him who was paralyzed, waist down. And that patient, after, this is all true, after he when they were changing him, the nuns were changing after he died, they threw an undershirt on him, and the guy walked up and he was walking. He got healed from being paralyzed. So that is a true story. But it was me who wrote the scene because I thought it would connect the story really well, and it's relevant to the story we were telling.
Yeah, I like that scene. One more question with, was it the same actor the entire time? Because at some point he got very old and very realistically older. Is that still the same? Yeah. Okay, we've come a long way with makeup.
Yeah.
To be more conservative. Thank you.
He was 74 when he died. Yeah.
It's called
He was
special effects.
No, actually, with the makeup, they were trying to tell me to age him even more, but I was kind of saying, no, let's do this very gradually, because to make it more natural looking, they wanted to. I'm like, I don't want to, like, all of a sudden, you see him 5 minutes later and he's like, looks like somebody else, so I actually put my foot down, and the only time we used the prosthetics was in that last scene. And I think the one before where he was already 74, so okay, he has to look different than when he looked like when he was in his late
Yeah.
40s.